Is that good posture?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dave.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I have better posture than Dave.
That's very true. We're choicing down.
And this is the clearing.
What is choicing down? Is a community of practice for conscious founders. That's what it is now.
Update.
Mm-hmm.
Life update. So, how do you like our new setup? We're not in our individual squares. We're now sharing a rectangle.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not in our own house, actually. So, that's interesting.
It's a really roundabout way of saying that we are staying in an Airbnb in Oakland.
Yeah, on a street that we used to live on when we were in Oakland. So when we talked about, I don't know if we mentioned this on the last podcast episode, we talked about retracing paths that we've already walked, and we're literally staying like 5 houses down from a house we used to live in, which is interesting. It's weird. It feels kind of like being a ghost, like seeing neighbors that we were never friends with, I guess. But the same people being here and like not being in relationship with them, but knowing them is like a kind of strange, surreal like experience for me. I don't know. It's been odd. And I'm also reading a book right now where someone is not remembered. So
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. We did go to the coffee shop that we used to go to around here, and we were remembered there.
we were remembered there.
So
It was
I
really
don't know.
nice.
Part of the reason that the ghostliness is we spent COVID lockdown here, and the nature of how we were living and lockdown and all that kind of stuff like made it difficult to create community. So
yeah, and we're just at a totally different point in our lives. Like I went for a long hike yesterday while Dave was out to dinner, and just feeling like completely like a different person in some ways, and just reflecting again, taking paths that I've traveled before and just reflecting on who I was the last time that I was the person walking these trails. And yeah, just different time of life, which is cool. Starting something new, but that has lineage and roots to what we were building when we were last here. So there's echoes coming through. And I don't know if I'm hearing them more clearly because we're here. I don't think, I mean, yes, probably more clearly. I don't think I'm reaching for the connection. I think that there's a connection to what we were working on previously.
Yeah, I mean, we very much started all of the things that we're doing right now on this block. Yep. So, there is a noticeable difference in the clarity of thought. Like at the point that we were picking up the kind of work that we're playing with now, which is this community stuff, which is founding things and entering into sort of conscious relationship with entrepreneurship
and work and vocation, like all of that started
a
few houses down the road here.
But we were very much in a place where we had no idea what that meant when we were here. So
we kind of like stumbled into like this area. We had a sense of wanting to work with meaning, which is interesting, like a meaningful career, like a meaningful vocation, like that kind of thing, which we're coming back to. I think in a more developed way.
Yeah, I mean, significantly more developed, which is like when we're wandering around here, like the contrast between that is, I don't know, it shows up significantly. So it's been very reflective being here. Which
is nice. We've both been sick since we got into the Bay Area, which is always fun when you're traveling. First, I always get sick first, and then Dave. So he's on the tail end of it. I'm feeling pretty much back to normal. Not so bad, just a cold, we think. Although we hear COVID is going around right now. So it's been.
Doesn't feel like COVID.
No, I don't think so.
So
I basically didn't have to slow down at all. Sleep more, which I like sleep, so that's cool. But we spent the first week with co-living with our friends with the startup Objet, and they're having an event tonight, so that's fun. It's like the way that I describe it, like a conscious consumerism product, and they're throwing a denim soiree. They're French, so Objet soiree. And yeah, it's just having a more conscious relationship with your clothing objects and other objects, I think, generally speaking, in your life. So starting with jeans, and we're going to get our jeans tattooed. So we're getting like a little patch that will have, I forget what the tech is called inside.
Yeah, so there's a patch that's basically a piece of cloth that is produced for a specific party. It's kind of got like an NFT vibe to it, and then an NFC tag that brings
NFC.
the party online, and it's on chain and all this kind of thing. So you can tap it, and then it creates a social network effect, and so it's a basically like social circular economy mending conscious consumer kind of product, and they're figuring it out. They're doing their first party tonight.
I love the market aspect with the menders and the, I guess, consumers coming into a relationship and having this relationship mediated by an object, a piece of like clothing, so that you can upcycle it continuously. And that's just super fun to me. I personally need like a mender in my life because I have I have a penchant for buying vintage clothes that are like almost perfect, but they need to be taken in, and then I don't have this relationship, and then they end up sitting in my closet forever, and I don't want to wear them excuse me, because they're not just right. So anyway, we got to live with them, the founding team of that, for a week, and their two kids and their nanny, and it was just like, it felt like a real co-living, and it worked actually surprisingly well. Well.
Everybody was, I think they had nomaded a lot. We were sort of opening up our nomading orientation again, like just discombobulated our schedules and all that stuff. But we knew going in that this was going to be the case. And so there was a very like strong co-living theme for the first week that we were out here. We ended up going to the Embassy, which is a co-living house, an old Victorian house in San Francisco, and hanging out with our friend Spencer there, and for an event, and then the talk that we hosted that we're kind of poking into here.
Yeah, I think we can talk about the talk.
Let's talk about the talk.
I got a little distracted in person because there's a spider. Did you see him?
No.
He like came around the microphone, so that's why I dipped off screen a little bit earlier, because I don't know, like
it was going to jump in your eyes,
something like that. I don't know. I'm like minorly afraid of spiders, more like curious about them, but this one's, it's not small, so I just wanted to know where it was, and I think it's under the microphone now, just so you know.
Okay.
Or maybe crawling up my feet, so if I start screaming mid talk show, then we know what's going on.
Okay.
So the talk.
Yes.
What was the talk about?
Talk was about living vocationally, and we sort of tossed it together. Like, one of the things that we're doing right now is like sort of I don't know, not trying not to overthink and trying to put out more often. And the opportunity arose because our friend Spencer was in this house, and it's a good venue, and then we had a bunch of friends around, and so Kristen has been putting together like little events and inviting people to them, and just using this as an opportunity for conversation and for sort of sharing what we're doing and checking in with other people. And so
I guess if I can jump in, one of the things that I'm realizing that I'm doing is starting to create a community around the work that we're doing. And I've done this with other communities before, and even our own. Like, one of the first things that we did when we first started working together at the house, just a few houses down here, is convening people into group dialogues. Like 10 to 15 people, like in people's homes. We did like a kind of mini tour over the course of, I want to say, like a few months. So it was kind of like the first inklings of our nomadic life. And I think that was in 2019. Yeah. So just, there's a bit of like reflecting on, I've done this before for our own community, and then I've been doing this for other communities, helping set up conversational places and spaces where conversation can emerge. Sometimes it's more explicit than others, and like some of the spaces are designed for XYZ. We've been more intentional about what we're designing our spaces for. So we created a space within Embassy for like an emergent dialogue about the work that we've been doing.
Yeah, and it was sort of a first attempt at an in-person explanation to a group.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the overall packaging of this thing was around the concept of living vocationally, and what that means to us across the you can endeavor to be an entrepreneur in many types of ways, and especially in the Bay Area, there's this distinct way of being a founder
Mm-hmm.
and working towards an exit, and throwing gas on the fire of some monopoly centric technology or something like this, and fine, like that works for certain types of businesses. And so we have been exploring like maybe a more holistic style of being a founder, and around the orientation to, if you're a talented person who can bring something into the world, very often you can do many types of things. And so orienting to the thing that is calling to you based
Mm-hmm.
on the context that you've arrived in this world, um, and all of the things that are pulling you away from doing that,
Yeah, doing your thing.
your thing. And that thing is a vocation, it's a calling. And how to relate to that in a way that you are living that into being, versus all of the other types of things that you can do. And so we basically um, talked about our path to coming into this style of work, and then sort of opened it up to a dialogue, and the dialogue was really fascinating. We learned a lot.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, like Dave said, it was the first time that we've hosted this. s- Not the first time we hosted this style dialogue, but the first time we had the content of conversation around reflecting on the past like 5 to 6 years. I mean, potentially even longer, because we part of our story is our individual stories and how we got to the point of working together and then what happened after that. And the reason we tell that story is because we both have different orientation points to vocational calling. Dave's been an entrepreneur much longer than I have. I have come to things more through system, and I've founded things, but it was more entrepreneurial, I would say, in the past. So, and my leaning was this more like social compass. I'm a social worker by training, so that makes sense. Dave's was more of this, I don't know, like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it feels like a kind of independence of lifestyle, like through being an entrepreneur, being able to fund your life by creating products and business that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an orientation to the market where you can go find problems that you have, that the people in your community have, package that into an offering, and then exchange that for money, right?
Yep.
And you don't need permission, or
Yeah,
like
you could do it on your own.
you can. And so like the environment that I was raised in, or whatever it is, came up in, had and this is in Las Vegas primarily, had an orientation towards like doing it yourself. This is also in the context of the first .com boom busting, like falling apart, and so the economy was like in the pot, and then the people that I was around was like, well, we can just pull together and build something ourselves, and then just go find customers and do this kind of thing. So I was lucky in the sense that like that orientation to just going out and figuring out what people need, and yeah, like
Yeah. So the long and short of it is us coming together as this like social work and this kind of style of entrepreneurship, and finding our way to a sort of social entrepreneurialism that is very tech focused, because that's the work that Dave has historically done. And I was super interested in technology because, coming from social work and healthcare consulting, technology is not what we were focused on, and we didn't have access to any kind of innovative tech at all. So I still think it's magical. I was talking to some people who are developers, and they laughed and agreed. They also think it's magical. It's just really cool working as a founder and with founders who are trying to bring something new into the world that can scale in the capacity that technology can. So infusing that with social is really what we're excited about. So where we're kind of landing, at least for now, in what we're trying to do. And this is sort of coalesced over the last, I don't know, few days, kind of, because we gave the talk/discussion. When was that?
Friday.
Wow.
A week ago.
Friday?
Yes.
That's crazy. Time flies. So we gave the talk about a week ago, and since then, like, a bunch has shifted because we got a lot of reflection. So we gave this story of our background, and then we talked about wanting to hold space for other people who might have not the same path as us, but potentially the same kind of direction or like navigational pull. Like, they want to do something meaningful, they want to do something in alignment with self. How do you do that in a world where, especially with entrepreneurship, where a lot of it is around how do you make the most money? And a lot of, I mean, just culturally speaking, like, the obviously the how do I want to say, like, the pull or the draw of capitalism with entrepreneurship is big. So a lot of that tends to orient around money. And that's a huge piece of being an entrepreneur. And we are not in opposition to that at all. We're aligned with that. We're just also adding in this whole other, like, suite of dimensions of life that we think are important. And we've learned are important through living them. So a lot of this is around, like, physical practices. It's all very practice oriented, and yeah, physical practices, meditation practices, different social practices, relationships with family and friends, relationship even with, like, environment, like where you're living, which is where, like, the nomadicism can come in. I don't know. There's lots of things here. Spirituality, I think, is kind of like touching on the meditation and other different types of practices for getting in touch with spirituality in different ways. So
Yeah, like so a few things there.
yeah.
The orientation that we had going in, like the embassy network space is very oriented towards social tech.
Yeah.
And we have danced in and around this. There's a bunch of Web3 kind of stuff that pops up here. There's decentralizing technology. There's the understanding of the sort of monolithic platforms and how they're, like, orienting society, and how
Yep.
control is maybe not distributed in a way that is democratic, and all of these kinds of things are bubbling up, and we've been touching on a lot of that stuff, and trying to figure out how it fits into the type of work that we're doing, right? So that's more like broad and 30,000. What does that mean in practice on the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, how do you live a life that is oriented, more in relationship to your values? Like, so bubbling up your values, that's good, right? But then you need to practice this. And so across what areas, across what regions of life are you interested? And the predominant, like, the predominant story of an American dream or something like this has you, like, working for a corporation, having a stable job, moving up a ladder, like buying a house and cars and all of these kinds of things, and getting the benefits of a consumer lifestyle and stability. And
Yep.
okay, fine. That's where the majority of the world is, at least in the West, and the place that we find ourselves. And that's the context in which we're operating. And so, okay, a lot of the time, the pro-social orientation and maybe some of the more idealistic thinking is, like, anti-capital, and like, we need to get rid of everything and move to a completely socially oriented, reciprocal,
Yep.
like, and great
Mutual aid,
all of this stuff.
exclusively.
And I'm very in favor of that stuff, but from the social work perspective, it doesn't seem to be in contact with reality as it stands now. And so, and again, this is my perspective on it. So
how is it not in contact with reality? Because I think
it
important.
It takes the idea of, well, it takes an evil, like capitalism evil, and all things that capitalism touch evil.
Yeah. It's
So
this
now,
oppositional thing.
and there's a
Yeah.
puritanical, this is the widest swing, obviously. Like
Yeah.
I'm using this as an example. There are plenty of people who have nuanced takes on this and are trying to do their best
Maybe
within
exaggerating for
effect.
example.
And
Yeah.
but like I have felt this in conversation around like how do you actuate change, or how do you
Yeah.
shift culture and this kind of thing. And in playing with that stuff on our side of things, like I've found it, when the market is not in contact, then we end up in this situation where we're like swinging at windmills with, wooden swords, and it's because we're not playing the game, or interacting with reality as it stands.
Yeah.
So
Well, and this was part of what we shared in the presentation
yes,
portion of the event was so we had two phases basically. Like the first phase was going for a traditional Web 2 kind of startup that was very focused on business and like how do you make a product that can make money. But the product that we were building was very pro-social and
yeah,
was very collaborative as group journaling, group blogging product. And that ended up not working for myriad reasons. The next phase we went into, we were like, well, what if we instead forefront the pro-social and backdrop the business side and like the money side. And we found that really rewarding because it was the first time in our lives that we were able to really focus on like almost exclusively this collaborative, cooperative way of being in the world. And we let the market sort of sensitivity, that aspect of being an entrepreneur, fade into the background a bit. And like we had some modest like market interactions, but it wasn't the focus, and the work
yeah,
that we were doing turned more into a kind of R&D lab with a group of people. So we had this like very peer based squad like working relationship, and it wasn't like we had products that we were bringing to consumers and playing with people on different levels, but we weren't exchanging money. That was like not the focus. And so that ended up not working because the market piece wasn't part of it. So it's not sustainable in a, like you're saying, like the relationship with reality. To live in the world, you do need to make money. So if we're going to be spending all of our time working that way, it was highly productive. We got to build a lot. We got to learn how to work together in this like squad like group. But if it's not making money, we can't do this long term. And everyone in the group.
not just making money, but like being in contact with like a sustainable dialogue with reality, right? Like the making money is, I think, the byproduct of that for sure.
I think it's the medium of that conversation.
Sure, it is a representation of like the thing being viable, right? Like
Yeah.
because there is an association with like, if I could only have money to do this thing, right?
No, it's the medium of the conversation. So if you're
Yes.
in conversation with an audience in exchange for financial capital,
Yes.
that is a mediation of the conversation then.
Yes.
And when you're not in that conversation, you lose like a sensitivity to the world in a way. So there's a way of so this is like bringing
this is what the conversation ended up being, and
yes.
and it was a good group because there's entrepreneurs, there's pro-social technologists, there's like social workers in the room, there's an economist.
There was another social worker in the room, which was really fun for me.
And so like the orientation to the market and bringing social goods to the market was like the basis of the conversation. And like, what does it mean to live vocationally in this way?
Yeah.
Like what are your aspirations? Like how do you go about it in practice? This kind of thing. And a couple things popped up that were like very salient, like definitions around these kinds of things and who we're trying to target. And we went in with the mentality that like we're in kind of an aporia, which is like the definition of this is an old Greek word, basically where you're disoriented, and this is a good state to be in because you can break frame and find new frame that is oriented to reality. This is how I feel this. And so like Socrates would in conversations with his pupils and people that he was philosophizing with, would would induce states of aporia by
Yeah.
basically, what about this? What about that? What about this? Because you're dropping into, well, we don't actually know.
Yes.
And from a place of not knowing, like, you can sensitize to what reality might be calling. So
we carried that into the space, which is an interesting thing to do when you are facilitating a conversation or a dialogue around something, to say, we don't know the answer to this, and the ground that we're going to cover is not something that we have covered before, in the sense of, we know exactly how we're going to travel, where we're going to travel. So it's pretty vulnerable. So we're putting ourselves in this space of vulnerability, which is actually, it's a lot of fun, because when other people agree, and the people in the group here agreed, and they were willing participants to also come in with vulnerability, and that's where the conversation gets really interesting, because people are, this is, I mean, again, aligning with like intuition and instinct, people start sharing things that they know to be true for themselves from a place of their own knowing. And then you get interesting serendipities. Then you start getting insights and pop-offs. These are the kinds of conversations where we had one person in the room who was having insights that he had not had before. And it can be a bit disorienting, because you don't know that you knew that before. And then you have people in the room weaving this kind of, and it's almost like a map, like a semantic map of understanding. And you're part of that weaving. And so there's this kind of recognition of yourself as part of something that you didn't see before, or that you knew something that you didn't realize that you had, like, embodied.
This is the I mean, I think the major takeaway in this is that, like, the presentational side of the thing, where we're bringing, like, sort of
our story,
and, like, we don't need to do a ton of that. Like, just add it to the context that can stir the pot, and then help hold the space for a dialogue that allows people to, like, emerge, or, like, to give voice to what is calling to them, right, within that conversational space. And every time we've done this, people have offered to us the feedback that they love it, and they're missing this kind of thing. And so that was my major takeaway. Like, oh, we can be doing more of these kinds of things. I think that they're very valuable, and
we like doing it.
We love doing it, and we end up learning a ton, and people come away with insights. So a couple of those insights that popped up in there, like one from our friend Kev, he brought forward this notion of, like, what it's like to operate as an entrepreneur, with, like, the sort of predominant story of, like, you are building value to exit.
Yes.
Right. And this thing is, like, so important to point out, like, this orientation to, like, working really hard and then getting a reward.
Protestant
right?
Protestant
work ethic, like the idea, if you work hard now, then you'll go to heaven, right? And then the fractal of that being, like, you work really hard for some period of time, and then you will get to the golden years of your retirement.
Yeah,
right?
You get to retire, which means you get to check out.
And so, like, which is an odd orientation if you are doing something that you love, right? If you are engaged with the world, and the work that you are doing is engaging you with a community, with a problem set that you find to be extraordinarily necessary and valuable, and it is enlivening you, and you are growing through the process of doing this, an exit is, like, bonkers. It doesn't make sense.
Well, it's not desirable. Like, why would you want to exit? Like, there's nuance here. So moving into different roles, and, like, developing into different roles within, like,
the exit as the idea that you are getting an influx of resource such that you can fuck off money.
Yeah, you can leave.
So
I'm just drawing the distinction. I think that there's a way of having a more nuanced take here, that it's not about exiting the whole arena completely. It's possible that we're moving into, this is just like an insight that I just had, moving into the exiting of a role. So if you serve as a founder, let's say, to bring something into being at a certain point, you might want to hand off a lot of the day-to-day operations or certain aspects of what you're doing, but serve in a different role, in different capacity in relationship to that thing that you've brought to bear, because you really care about it. And you have a really interesting perspective too when you've founded something, for example.
Sure.
So there's movement in here where it's not exiting, it's transitioning into different places of relationship to something.
Sure. How do you see that in relationship to the conversation that we were having? Like, so we were talking about um,
There's
like in a VC context or something like this, or are you just seeing it?
I think that what's the question?
So like the particular like distinction that we're making, and I hear you, like the orientation to, like, I guess a more fluid transition, like understanding where you are, where you'd like to be in relationship to the calling that you have, right? Like the
Yeah, I think there's like a continuity of relationship to the calling,
mhm,
which has a relationship to there's like an object, which is the efforts and the project that you're working on. And instead of the relationship being severed to that object and like
yes,
thus vocation,
yeah,
you are having a different perspective or orientation point to it. So, and oftentimes those perspectives and orientation points are given through different roles, is like a practical way of seeing it.
sure,
So you sometimes hear, like, I'm thinking of, I worked for a nonprofit when I first graduated with my master's degree in social work. And the founder of that nonprofit was now serving in a board position. And he was like, but bored, like, I don't even know how to explain. He was in his 80s. So he was still showing up at the office because he cared about the thing. He did not have day-to-day responsibility, but he was there to mentor younger people who were coming through, like myself.
sure,
And he would show up because we had a working board at board meetings and would be able to contribute in ways that only he had that perspective, and it was valued. But he, like, the day-to-day stuff and even some of the cultural stuff, because he was so old, his contribution was different, but he was still participatory in a way that you wouldn't typically see. Like, he could have retired, he could have cut and gone and done
yeah,
like whatever he wanted, but he wanted to be part of it. So I mean, I'm sure he changed multiple roles from where he started. So
yeah.
there's still this relationship. It just
So what I'm
changes.
and that's great. So I'm trying to understand, and I think this is like an open exploration. Like, part of the thing is
Yeah.
like the orientation towards like building an organization, like in a corporate sense or something like this, right? A
Hmm.
business. There is the bootstrap founder type, like archetype or whatever it is, where you are building this thing as a lifestyle and
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
engaged with,
Hmm.
and there's a long term, and there's a long term relationship there, right? And then the context that we were having a conversation in is like the sort of VC context, right?
Yeah.
Where not always do you have a situation where a founder can turn into a CEO and continue
Yeah.
to run the thing. Like very often, like, you were booted out in a particular way, or you were voluntarily leaving, and like the 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 instinct that brought the thing into being is then moved over into managerial hands, or something like this. And so,
Well, a
like,
lot of
these
that has to do with scaling too.
totally. And
Yeah.
so the conversation around how do you scale these things, how do you think about scaling these things, I mean, it's an open conversation. So, like, from what you were talking about, like, what I'm feeling is that there are alternate ways of transitioning, like, through the process of bringing
Yeah. And I think that,
entities into being.
yeah, and I think that potentially relates to organizational styles of relationship,
Sure.
which humans have been experimenting with on lots of different forms. Like, one of the forms that we're sort of saying doesn't work great is the completely peer-to-peer and non-market like mediated.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, this is resident in all the DAOs having shitloads of problems,
yeah.
like, from what we've heard.
There's also, though, some of the peer-to-peer non-market mediated probably works well. I mean, in our experience and my experience, like broadly within community in smaller group structures. Like there are spaces for these different organizational styles. It's just, how do you design with it and where does it live? And there's nuance across the board here. It doesn't have to be that the whole organization is set up that way.
No. So anyways, this was like sort of in the room as we're talking about it. And there was an overarching like orientation to like this like sort of point that we were touching on before about bringing things to market and like being in relationship with customers and consumers, right? And then there possibly being an orientation to uh like consumers having like I guess a consciousness to what they're bringing into their lives and products and services that
Sure.
that lean into that, not treating people as like a sort of a pile of resource that you're trying to pull from, but being closer in relationship. And businesses that tend to do this like are successful because they are creating a community aspect around the style of business. And you can sort of point to things like Patagonia and there's a whole slew of these kinds of things. I think Seth Godin does a good job of bringing this to light. And so how can we like come together and orient towards building businesses in this way? And so that's the sort of standing conversation. This is where we're playing, and there's a bunch of interesting stuff bubbling up from this. Like this style of conversation, we want to host more of them. I think to contact founders who are like and entrepreneurs who are living this,
Yep.
and who are where are they getting support on this kind of thing? Like yes, we have a whole bunch of questions. And so we're sort of setting ourselves up to do an interview tour,
Yep.
like with this mindset in mind.
Yeah. And we've got a vision of building a community of practice around what we unearthed there. And we're not going into the interviews with like a set, we are going to be building a community that does exactly XYZ. We've got some hypotheses, but we're more open because we want to hear from people on the ground. That's not just us and the people in our immediate network to feel into the nuances of what it's like to be an entrepreneur in this way.
Yeah. And from the conversations that we've been having out here, especially the conversations I've been having with some longtime friends and some new people, like there is a leaning in to a desire for this thing, which I think we've been feeling for a very long time, but it's crystallizing in a way that is very interesting. So, yeah.
And I think just to respond to that, the reason why we've been feeling into it for a long time, but it's been hard to embrace, and I've had this reflection from other people before, is it is a bit counterculture.
Yeah.
So it has an alignment with the predominant mode of capitalism, but it's not an entrepreneurialism, but it's not the exact form that we're seeing in it now. So, I mean, it does dovetail really nicely, I think, with what I've seen in a lot of the spiritual and meditation and like healthcare, or not healthcare, but like, what would you call it? Wellness.
Yeah.
Yes. So taking care of yourself holistically, this kind of thing, it's like bringing that into entrepreneurship. And that's also not completely novel. I know that lots of places focus on that, but it's kind of the space that we're playing.
We want to participate in the world in this way.
Yeah.
And like if we can't find spaces to chuck in, which we've had a difficulty doing, and we have an orientation towards something that we wish to live into being, we'll make it ourselves. This is the DIY thing. So but first we're going to go talk to people and sort of report back what we're finding. But yeah, I think the sensibility that you just described there, like shorthand, is like a kind of like spiritual entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Like, and spiritual is a big, broad category, but
totally,
like orienting to reality in such a way that is calling based, that is practice based, sort of non-denominational, however that works.
It's not only rational, as in rational measurable. Like part of it, like this is when we talk about like intuition and instinct, it's like this embodied felt sense that you have of what's calling to you, that it's sometimes ineffable. It's hard to explain to other people. And part of the job that we have as entrepreneurs who work in this way is figuring out the best approximation for how to explain this. And this is where story and metaphor comes in, because it is hard to communicate sometimes, which is also always the job as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So I guess the final note, the living vocationally thing is doing this as a practice.
Yeah.
Like
A lifestyle practice.
The entrepreneurial endeavor, the building a business, the being in touch with customers and partners and all of this kind of thing is a really good place to practice being in relationship with reality. It's very emotional, it's very difficult, it's challenging in lots of ways. You are pushing yourself. It is inviting you to grow. And so it is a very good place to practice a spiritual life.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're sort of feeling that, like, okay, this is a ground of practice. How do you go about doing this? And yes. So that's our investigation.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks for the conversation.
2 people on a couch. Bye.